Gentlemen, let's perhaps start off, Mark, with you. I mean, I came across an article on Forbes.com saying that sports sponsorships have been one of the few consistent and relatively safe places for corporations and for direct advertising dollars during the economic turbulence over the past years. What's the basis for commentary like that that's out there?
Alicia, I think that's built off the back of the fact that sponsorship allows you to play in such a personal market. Those brands that sponsor and sponsors that do their research and their homework before they get into a specific sponsorship property get a really good understanding of the type of market and the people within that community around that event or sponsorship property that they can interact with. And the beauty of sponsorship, unlike other forms of marketing, is it just allows you to operate in a very close personal environment with a spectator, with a fan of that particular sport or property, be it arts or culture. And I think because of that one-on-one personal interaction, it really provides the platform for a sponsor to leave an impression on that particular individual, and hopefully that then translates into direct sales of that particular product, etc. And I think because of that, and because it harnesses people's passions, it's something that really has stood out given the economic tough times that we've faced.
Errol, let's bring you in here and take a look at, from Castle Lager's perspective specifically, why Castle has seen this as an effective marketing tool.
I think to Mark's point, if you look at people's passions, conversations on Friday evening and Monday morning are generally about what's going to happen over the weekend and what was the weekend like. I think that's when men get together, and we want to tap into that sweet spot where boys come together and actually share different moments, in this case sport, and we want to ensure that how do we as a brand play in that space and ensure that we can harness those emotions to our brand's benefit.
Alistair, I mean, effectively what we're looking at here is building brand awareness overall. How does that actually translate into driving sales?
So, as Errol said, sport is a passion in South Africa, in fact, on the continent. And it just provides us with a wonderful way of tapping into emotions and the psyche. And it is a captive audience, as Mark has said. So, on game days, we have, the pre-game, the post-game, and during the game. And boys do get together and they make it a day outing, which becomes amazing for us from an emotional perspective, and especially our brand, Castle Lager, lends itself well to these occasions.
Well, Mark, it's all about that strategic fit. So let's take a look at criteria. When a company is selecting the kind of brand, sporting event, personality that it wants to associate with, what are some of the key points that a company would have to look at?
Alicia, I think the trend at the moment and globally is very much like you say, is for people to do a lot of research before they enter into a sponsorship property, which is really what you would want. You want them to understand the environment or the community that are passionate about that event or interact with that event. And by that it can be the spectators, the fans, people sitting in an audience, whoever it might be. If you understand who they are and what their needs and what their desires are, you can speak to them directly. And so I think that's on the one side of it, is understanding the property that you get into. But then from a brand perspective, you've got to have very, very clear and outlined objectives to say, I am entering the sponsorship property because of X, Y, and Z. And, one might be sales impact, and I want to have a sales impact that goes from X to Y. And you set yourself measurable objectives that, at the end of the year or at the end of the sponsorship term, you can then evaluate what impact that sponsorship's had on you. You mentioned awareness just now, and I think awareness certainly is one aspect, but it's how that awareness then translates into the impact of the sponsorship property.
Also risk, you've got to take that into consideration, and one would assume that risk is higher if you're associated with a personality as opposed to a sporting event or a team as a whole. I mean, how do you manage that relationship specifically?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, I think there are certain sporting personalities that perhaps wouldn't be the right fit for some brands and probably a great fit for others. And again, I think it's being very selective and doing your homework before you get into such a relationship, if it's with an individual personality in that case.
Of course, Errol, doing your homework beforehand is one of those key, and critical elements to consider. But when you're in this relationship, just how much of a role can the sponsor extend?
I think is what we've been able to play over the last 18 years since we've been involved with the national teams. I think is around value add. because ultimately our objective and focus is around the spectator that follow or passionate about this sport. And what we bring into the party with our partners is to actually expand the experience from just being a 90-minute or an 80-minute match into an experience that starts way before the games and that continues post the games, which adds value to the partners that we work with.
Alistair, how do you keep it relevant? Just, not something that audience get used to seeing whenever they watch a certain event or a team and eventually become oblivious to it. It's got to be hard work.
So one of the exciting things for us is tapping into the psyche of our nation. And when you see events like the World Cup of last year, the Cricket World Cup in India, and now the Rugby World Cup, and how we tap into the psyche of the nation around those particular events is amazing for us. So we're very topical, we're very relevant, and we're backing, Bafana, the Boks, or the Proteas at a time in our history that is quite an emotional high for the country. Yeah. And it's just wonderful as a brand like Castle. It's iconic to be associated with those moments, and they create memories that live forever in people's psyche. And that's how we drive our emotional connection.
Absolutely. Mark, it's got to be a bit of a challenge, though, for companies to continuously get this right, and so, that their associations continue to add value here. Just how much of a challenge is it for companies?
Yeah, Alicia, very much so. I think for a lot of brands that have been in sponsorship for a long time, I think initially the whole sort of sponsorship space and the sponsorship industry was very much around awareness, putting your brand up, getting exposure, etc. But it really is around the activation and leveraging your relationship. Sponsorship and buying a sponsorship just gives you access to a platform and gives you access to an audience. It's then how you interact with that audience that really, like I say, creates that impact, and ideally in that one-on-one environment.
And that, of course, then bringing in the viability of the cost structures that we're looking at. So let's take a look at that, because debate rages on questioning whether or not the market is overpriced at the moment. Where do you stand within that debate?
I mean, it's a very fair comment. I think a lot of what happens is, the market demand is setting the prices, and things like the Football World Cup had a major impact, particularly on football rights fees. Mm-hmm. I know, Errol and Alistair will allude to that as well, I'm sure, in terms of, the cost of their variety of their sponsorships that they've got into. But there was a lot of speculation that rights fees would come down quite significantly post World Cup, and that hasn't seemed to be the case. I think people have learned how to activate and get more value from sponsorships, and as a result there's a greater desire for brands to be in that space.
Ultimately, Alistair, I mean, like Mark has been saying, it boils down to supply demand that will always set out the price structure. Your view on the kind of price tags that these associations come with?
Yeah, they're not cheap, and they've obviously evolved over time, and there are a lot of players in the market that have chased the price of sponsorship up. Mm-hmm. And Errol mentioned it, but we've been involved since we got back in '91 into the international arena, and prices have dramatically grown as more sponsors have got involved. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things for us is our spend around sponsorship begins when we sign the contract, because it's how you bring the property to life as opposed to just paying a contractual fee and then hoping that you're going to get your rights. You've got to actually work hard at making it come to life around the game, before the game, after the game, on television, wherever you're leveraging the property.